Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of European Action for Sustainability, Investing in Partnerships to Achieve the SDGs, Senior Expert on Sustainable Development and Circular Economy at the UN Environment Programme, Spyridon Kouvelis, and our distinguished panel.
And that would be me, guys, here. So thank you very much for attending this session. Let me just give you an outline of how we will do this. We've heard before Muhtar Kent speak from the side of private large companies how sustainability is and can and should be incorporated in what big companies do. We just heard a very interesting array of people talk about how local government and the public-private cooperation can lead to positive results. So now, what we will have to do is having a very interesting array of lead speakers and then everybody who participates in this round table. What we will literally do is take all of that, put it in the blender, and add more ideas, and then come up with some hopefully useful conclusions. Now, the way we'll do it is we have 6 lead speakers. I will give the floor to each of them for a short period of time. Overall, we need to cover something like 40 minutes, so please try to stay around 5 to 8 minutes or something like that. Now, and before we do this, I'd like, from my own experience, to make a couple of opening statements. Now, 2015 was a very important year for the world because we had 2 major agreements that came up in that year. The first one was the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the second one was the agreement by 150-something, 59, I think, countries of the United Nations that agreed to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, both these things were huge developments for the world because they could literally change the way we see and we operate within the world. But why specifically the SDGs are so important? I heard before in the discussion that I think the opening discussion with President Barroso, somebody mentioning that populism is something that is very well established on underlying reasons. And underlying reasons for populism are inequalities. They are the fear of the future in the sense that you don't know what will happen because of climate change, because of public health issues. They are based on lack of education. They are based on poverty. So unless you shift towards something more sustainable for everyone, you welcome populism. That's very important. In my experience working as an advisor to the United Nations Environment Programme for the Mediterranean, we have tried to see how the national strategies can incorporate the SDGs. And what we found by doing a peer review between big and small countries around the Mediterranean is that governments and public administrations face a very, very big challenge in doing so. First, because they don't know how to do it, they don't have the capacity. And second, because we saw that there is a literal huge distance between the public and the private sector. So one has to start thinking about how you can cope with that. And of course, we heard Muhtar Kent, and I'm sure we'll hear more people speaking about the importance of sustainability for the own sustainability of the companies, as you said. But also, we want to hear today how companies can lead by example, how they can set the pace for others, bigger, smaller, horizontally and vertically. I liked very much this notion. One of the very big challenges that we have found in our experience in trying to implement the SDGs is what we call the silo effect. Everybody can choose one of the SDGs, education, poverty, health, climate change, and deal with that in a singular way. But that misses the purpose. The purpose is to try to bring those things together, maybe not address everything at the same time, but at least have the cross-breeding, cross-mixing of these things together so you get with one effort more results. And in that way, you can also respond to society because, as it was very well said, one company can very well do something on charity or something very good on the environment. This will not respond to the questions that the society will put up there, and still the big company will or may be considered the enemy. So you have to find ways that you bring those two things together. At the end of the day, there is this Sustainable Development Goal number 17, which is about partnerships, and this is what we have to look into forging. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor with alphabetical order. So we'll start with Peggy Antonakou, who is the CEO of Microsoft in Greece, Microsoft Hellas. Peggy, you have the floor.
Sorry. Thank you. So on our side, I want to speak a little bit about technology and the role of technology on how to support achieving the sustainable goals, the sustainable development goals. Technology is one of these sectors that have what we say in Greek, ευχή και κατάρα, wish and a curse that touches upon all of them, all 17, and anything that is happening right now, we touch upon that. So technology can play and will play and does play already a significant role in achieving each one of these goals. As we know, technology is now in an era where it's developing faster than ever, it's moving faster than ever, and it's changing the world faster than ever. However, speed is not the only measure of success right now for technology. What's the point of a really fast train that moves really fast with not so many people on it? So the point of technology right now, the success for technology is not just how fast we move and how fast we transform. Everyone speaks of digital transformation these days, but it's how inclusive we become. How many people can actually have access to our technologies? How many lives can we impact? How many lives can we improve? So we in Microsoft really believe in that and have our main goal. If you look at our mission, we say that we need to empower every organization and every individual on the planet to achieve, to do and achieve more. So we need to include everyone. But of course, technology can enable change, can enable improvements, but it's not enough. As many people said already, we need leadership. We need business leadership, we need political will, and we need citizenship. So it's obviously, it's up to the companies, it's up to the public sector, to the governments, but it's also up to each one of us individually, as citizens, as parents, as people. So Microsoft is present in 170 countries. It's pretty much every country on the globe. And we try to do that and achieve that by local partnerships. We have, for example, in Greece, more than 2,000 partners and tens of thousands of partners locally. A speaker said before that it's really important to have relevance on a local level. So we approach all these goals, not just as one Microsoft globally, but also with local partnerships. So if you look at all the countries that we operate in, and if you talk to our partners, there's always a solution that solves a problem that pertains into one of these 117 goals. Should I go into the specifics of what we do for each one of them, or? Yeah, okay. So I would say that there's 4 areas where we are more focused and where we do more things, and that's more relevant actually to what we do as a company. One is education. The other one is decent work and economic growth. The other one is equality. And the last one is sustainable cities and smart cities. Of course, these are not, as I said, not the only ones. We touch pretty much everything, but these are the ones where I think we are more active and they're more relevant to our mission and what we do as a company. So starting with education, because I think it's really important, and this is one of the pain areas, I think, for Greece and, if I may say, for Europe as well, if you agree. It's amazing to look at the EU Commission data and see that almost 40% of the European labor force is really has really insufficient labor skills in terms of digital and what we're looking to have in the future. And the amazing thing is that we're speaking about farmers, bankers, workers, all alike. I mean, we're all missing the digital skills, myself inclusive. We used to say, I remember my father used to say that, you need to speak Chinese. That was 20 years ago. That was fashionable at the time. You need to speak Chinese if you want to, be a pioneer. The language of the future now is called coding. If you want to teach your kids something that is of use for the next 20 years or so, they really need to start coding. And the way we approach this is we use coding classes. We offer them through NGOs, through local universities, local schools, and we use coding as a game. I mean, you can, even a kid as young as 6, 7 years old can actually code. And they just do it as a game, as a different approach, so that they become more familiar with it and they're not afraid of it. Now, if I look at Greece specifically, what we've done in the recent years, because unemployment is such a huge issue for us, both youth unemployment, but also unemployment for everyone. We're talking about almost 60% youth unemployment, and overall population unemployment almost 27, 28, depending on the time frame. And one word that is really important to me, if you look at one of these goals, is decent work. Decent work, decency. One of the things that has really been a problem for the Greek population, because if you hear that someone is unemployed, okay, they don't have an income, they don't have other issues, but decency is something that if you look at families where they have no income whatsoever because, you know, a husband and a wife both are not working, decency is a problem. So we need to make sure that not only there's work, but there's decent work. A big difference between the two, right? What we did recently is we had a partnership with OAED, which is the local manpower group, where we provided free of charge classes of Microsoft technology, so in order to improve their digital skills, to more than 500,000 unemployed people. You can go to a website, a specific website, you can register, you can have access, and you can train yourself to whatever you need to be trained on. And we actually did the same recently with UNCTAD, which is an organization for the public workers. So we need to make sure that we improve digital skills for the unemployed, for the youth, and for the public workers if we're going to see the benefit of that, and of course the next generation. We also, through Youth Spark, we provide cash incentives to NGOs to develop innovative solutions, again, for education on digital skills. And I can sit here for an hour and go through all the different programs that we have, but I won't. The point is that education is a really important way of moving forward, especially for Greece, 8 years after the crisis. We really need to make sure that we don't look at short-term solutions, but also long-term for our future. So that's one. Equality, gender and all is an important
There's no way I'm letting you take as much time for every one of those, right? There's no way I'm letting you take as much time for each one of those.
Okay, I'll just take 3 more minutes. I don't know, it says here 73 minutes. I can take all of them if you want.
No, please go ahead.
Just 3 more minutes, thank you. Equality, obviously, gender and all. I'll take a minute to speak about gender. Obviously, in STEM, we have an issue with women and with young girls. Less than 25% were able to attract them. The biggest problem that we've seen, we commissioned a survey, 12,000 women across Europe. And what we saw was that girls have really high interest on STEM at about the age of 10, 11, 12. And by the time they're 16, we've lost them. They have no interest whatsoever. They really switch directions. The reason for that is that they feel that it's a boys' thing. It's not for us. It's not for women. It's not for girls. And the main thing is that we don't have role models. And that's obviously a big issue for Greece, but I would say that it's a global issue as well. In the US, we have some women in really prominent roles in technology, but we can do much better than that. So we need to make sure that we have role models. We need to make sure that we talk in school, again, goes back to education, in schools, in education, in universities, about math, about technology, about innovation to women and girls as well. I'll talk really fast about economic growth. One thing that we've done in Greece is that we have a Microsoft Innovation Center, which has been active in Greece since 2008. It was actually inaugurated by Bill Gates himself. And in these few years, we have managed to support more than 400 startups. Obviously, startups is a really important way of creating jobs and creating innovation in our society. And last but not least, we're talking about sustainable cities. We have a program that is called Smart City, and recently Microsoft City Next, and recently through that program we also had a hackathon with the city of Athens, and we had the pleasure of listening to the mayor before, where we invited startups to develop innovative solutions to create digital services for citizens. So as I said, I can take the next 70 minutes to go through all the different initiatives that we have, but these are kind of the top of our list. And as I say, technology can and will and does play a huge role in pretty much every single one of these goals, but it takes much more than technology. The technology is there. It's just a matter of what we do with it and how much leadership we want to show. Thank you.
Peggy, thank you very much. I'm sure that I would have liked to give you more time to describe in more detail what you do, because it really is very interesting. However, I'd like to also give the floor to the other lead speakers, and then once we're complete with the lead speakers, I would like to ask the other people around the table, whenever you want to make a comment or a question, you will just have to put your card up, and then we'll be able to take your question or comment. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Muhtar Kent. He is the next in our speakers list. And one thing that I definitely want to underline more, not necessarily because he will refer to that, but out of our discussion here, is that we want to hear possibilities of how the private sector reaches out or responds to the needs of the public sector and civil society to try to bring all that together, because it's a huge leap and nobody can do it by themselves. Mr. Kent.
Thank you. I'm going to speak very shortly because I have already said a lot on stage. But let me just say what a privilege it is to be in such a distinguished group, and compliments to Concordia for putting together this meeting and this panel. From the perspective of business, we have learned one thing: advancing the Sustainable Development Goals is nothing other than ensuring the viability and long-term sustainability of our business and our company and of our system. That's the simple math that we use, and it's worked over and over again. Our learnings have been always focus. You can't do everything at the same time. Make sure that your business benefits from what you're doing, and really go deep and long term. So 10-year goals, as in our case, have worked really well for us. Very bold goals. People thought we were crazy in the beginning when we put some of those goals out. 5 million women, how can that happen? Is it real? And then have them audited by an external unit, nothing to do with your business. Have every year external audit reports so that you can actually then talk about your achievements, and then make it simple. 3 W's is our beacon here: women, water, and well-being. Well-being of communities, well-being of people, financial well-being, mental well-being, and physical well-being. Make it wide for people to understand, and make yourself responsible in front of your share owners. Explain why you're doing it in front of people who buy pieces of paper called stock of your company. Explain it clearly. And let them understand why water neutrality is such an important thing, why 5 million women entrepreneurs. Because when you empower 5 million women entrepreneurs, the engagement scores inside the company amongst the 770,000 employees shoot into the sky positively also. And so it helps the business from that perspective. When you have higher engagement, you have a much more motivated workforce and a more successful business also. And these are some of the learnings that we've had, and they've worked for us, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing again with us.
Thank you.
And I really like to underline one point that you mentioned about going deep in long term, because I was having a discussion actually before in the lobby that, you know, with governments you sometimes have this impediment of the electoral cycle. With companies you don't. So you can have long-term targets and reach them because it's good also for business and society. Now, I promise not to comment after every speaker, but I would like to invite now His Excellency Mr. Néstor Osorio Londoño, who is the Ambassador of Colombia to the United Kingdom, who is right next to me. Please.
Thank you very much, Spyros. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm very honored to share this table with such a distinguished audience. I think that the framework of this discussion has been very well put already, and especially from the perspective of the private sector from Chairman Kent. it is clear that this collaboration between the public and the private sector, all in all, listening to what comes from the civil society, the academia, is fundamental in order to create and develop a clear plans of development and investment. The Sustainable Development Goals are a comprehensive agenda for development. And here we have to bear in mind that the tremendous change that occurred in 2015 when the United Nations agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals compared with what it was the Millennium Development Goals. From 8 Millennium Development Goals in which the responsibility was placed basically in the developing countries in order to solve basic problems, sometimes with the help, sometimes with the assistance of international agencies, and then to go to a more comprehensive, more universal, and more committed agenda in which both developed and developing countries, private and public sectors were committed to say something that was comprehensive in the sense that it was not only for the well-being of the people, but also to save the planet. Because this conjunction of the components of social, economic, and environmental approach were fundamental in order to deal with the major problems. Colombia has the honor to be one of the countries that participated very actively in the initiative of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I had the honor in 2013 to be the president of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, the ECOSOC, that ensure that this transition to Millennium Development Goals, to the Sustainable Development Goals, was possible. It was a tremendous achievement in which no more than a basic development economic program for the world was established. Now, coming to the real needs and the real tools of this partnership, I think that apart from the possibilities of contributing to development and to be a good partner of a government, the private sector has a tremendous strategic role to play. First of all, helping to identify the needs, to identify the areas in which their activities could be of importance for the plans of development of a government. In my case, in the case of Colombia, we include the Sustainable Development Goals in the National Plan of Development, and more than that, and recently, we made those development goals as part of our post-conflict plans of development, because all of these 17 goals, you will find that in different areas, the impact of dealing with these problems that goes from reducing poverty to improving opportunities of education to improving health, the private sector needs to play a role. And what is the responsibility of the government? To be a facilitator and to lay down appropriate basis for the private sector to be able to act and to help in this development. I have seen, for instance, that without concrete projects or plans from the government about identifying these needs, the private sector could be a little bit lost about where it could be needed. So in order to facilitate implementation of what are plans, you need concrete projects to give an idea where do you want to go in infrastructure, in health, in education, and especially in facilitating that this economic development could be an homogeneous and not just a concentrated development in some areas of the countries. Technology, as it was mentioned before, plays a tremendous role, and more we give access to people to means of technology and to means of communications, more we are helping for the development of the country. So I think that here we are in a position in which not only to main programs or plans of the government, the private sector could play a very important role. But I want to mention another in which I think the role of the private sector and sustainability is key. Many developing countries are very dependent still of very few commodities. And those commodities are part of the business life of many national and international companies. And Coca-Cola knows very well what I'm talking about, being Colombia, for excellence, the country of coffee, of agricultural products, with a tremendous potential to develop the possibilities of being one of the food suppliers of the world. One of the missions that the private sector has here is to help to guarantee that those resources are going to be durable, are going to be sustained. I'm going to mention the case of coffee because I devoted part of my life to that. And today, the prices of coffee are, in monetary numbers, the same of 25 years ago. The consumption has increased substantially at a rate of 2% per year. The prices continue to be very low for the producers of coffee. The same happened with cocoa, the same happened with sugar, with some fruits, with some grains. So if we don't find ways to remunerate those producers in an appropriate way, then the possibilities of the interest of those producers to continue in the field producing those goods are going to diminish. When you see that today more than 20% of the people of the world drinks coffee, then if you are Coca-Cola or you are any other company involved in the production of food, coffee included, then you have to think how to preserve that product and how to fulfill your social responsibility in the terms of providing the necessary means for the production of these products. And needless to say that in a case like ours, the possibilities of these people not to be involved in this kind of agricultural products, but other illicit products is always there as an alarm that is sounding all the time. So here, to refer to something that was already in the mind of 2 or 3 of the previous speakers, is youth unemployment. The agricultural field is one in which, if we do not provide attractive conditions, good perspectives, then the people from the rural area is leaving the rural area, going to the urban sector to find opportunities and to create problems, because this kind of avalanche of people to the urban sector is enormous. So these are 3 or 4 points that I think is important to put in perspective, not only from the partnership, public and private, but how this private partnership could be more useful. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I think it's a great privilege for all of us in Concordia Europe today to have you with us, having been there when the whole thing was being engineered, approved, and now with your very valuable comments about how this can be brought towards both the private and the public sector, and I hope we'll have more discussion about it afterwards. I'd like now to invite Mr. Dimitri Papalexopoulos, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Cement Company. Please, Dimitri.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sometimes it is useful to look backwards before you look forwards. And I would like to spend a few minutes taking you a little bit on the journey we followed as a company to where we are today, hopefully in a way that provides some meaningful input to the discussions. So for my sins, I was a consultant earlier in life. You can't get away from wanting to put everything in a framework. So I've thought of a very simple framework to describe what we've been through. So by means of background, we are not exactly a household name like Microsoft or Coca-Cola. We are a cement producer, building materials company. We started life in Greece 115 years ago. We were active only in Greece for the majority of those 115 years. It's only in the last 20 years or so that we've been able to expand meaningfully outside of Greece. Our biggest presence is in the US, but we're also present in a number of Eastern European countries, also places like Egypt, Turkey, Brazil. So the point of departure for us has always been that extremely challenging, some would say bipolar relationship between a cement plant and the local community next to which it operates. Because a heavy building materials plant provides sustenance, provides jobs, economic vitality, but also seriously burdens the environment and creates many problems for the local community. So for us, sustainability has always from the beginning been a strategic, not a decorative initiative. Earlier in our lives, we went through the first phase, so that's the first phase I would call the reactive phase. We had problems, we had to face the problems. We early on took a decision that if you take a long-term perspective, and as a cement plant lives for 40 years, we've been around for 115 years, you have to take a long-term perspective. Once you take a long-term perspective, you get around to the fact that you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. So you have to take a view that you have to build trust. And the way to build trust is well-trodden, difficult, painful, but necessary. You have to be transparent, you have to open up, you have to communicate, you have to provide data, you have to be honest about the problems and not pretend they don't exist, you have to set up proper governance, you have to publish. We first published our first CSR report in Greece in 1983. And over time, that worked for us. Partly, I think, because we came across as being more genuine and more authentic than most. In those early phases. But quickly the limits of that reactive phrase became apparent, and we went to the next phase of our development, which I would call proactive. And the best example I would have of that is the carbon emissions problem. Cement is responsible for a good part of man-made cement carbon emissions, partly because it's energy intensive, partly because of the chemical process. So as an industry, at about the turn of the millennium, around the year 2000, a number of progressive companies got along and set up the Global Cement Sustainability Initiative. And the basic motivation there was simply, if we don't tackle the issue will tackle us in the way we won't like. So it was enlightened self-interest, as Muhtar, I think, implied earlier. And we got together and approached the issue from the most mundane, like how do you measure emissions? Back then it was not obvious, and the standard that we created is actually and now established around the world in other industries as well. How do you gain credibility? By verifying externally, not have people take your word for it. How do you scale technical solutions? We worked together with the International Energy Agency to come up with solutions. And over time, a lot of very good and creative work was done, and actually we found that we could then share many other areas, and responsible use of raw materials, of land, water. We're not nowhere near water neutrality yet, but we are working on it. Health and safety, and so on and so forth. But then again, that proactive phase also quickly reached its limitations, increasingly because it became apparent in the process that we were constrained by the fact that we were mostly emitting and not receiving. We were talking, not listening. We were explaining, not understanding. And therefore, we eventually went to what I call the third phase, which I would call interactive. That was based on the fact that society has become far more demanding. And it's not just a question of telling them what we want them to hear or what we think we want them to hear, but asking them openly what their issues are. And that has become an integral part of getting and preserving our license to operate. So we have worked very hard on systematic stakeholder dialogue, and I must say it has proved hard slog. It hasn't proven easy, and I won't go into. We can speculate as to why that is, and I have my own explanations. I won't go into details, but it definitely has a lot to do with the fact, in my mind, that in big parts of society today and the political system, business is still part of the problem rather than part of the solution, and that's one of the things we have to address. Also, however, the fact is, until recently, it was very difficult to get a common language between business and government to talk about those issues. And there's where I feel that the SDGs are making a meaningful step forward in providing that bridge, that common language between business on one hand and government and civil society on the other hand. We have already tailored our local materiality assessments wherever we operate around the SDGs, and that has been very useful in engaging with local communities. And that brings me to the fourth phase after reactive, proactive, interactive. The fourth phase in my mind is collaborative. And that is based on the realization, I think, that's been pervading, which is the very essence, I think, what we're discussing today, that we can be far more effective in working together than each government or society or business working separately. And based on that common language, I think there's huge potential to do that. Let me illustrate with one example of what we've been trying to do and illustrate what the opportunity is, but what all the problems are as well. And the area I'd like to focus in for the last couple of minutes is the area which I think can be fairly presented as probably the defining challenge of our times in many of the communities we operate in, and that's unemployment and particularly youth unemployment, as has already been mentioned. So focusing on that area has been one of the pleasant surprises for us when we did it in a small, contained way where we could have direct influence. I'll give you two examples. Kosovo, we have a plant in Kosovo. We had to downsize to stay competitive, but that was in a community that had 65% unemployment. So what do? We got together with the American Farm School in Thessaloniki, which is, by the way, is doing an excellent job, and the local mayor, and put together an incubator for small agribusiness. It took some money, not very much. It took a lot of getting, what businesses do best, marshal resources, get them together, some technical support from the school, and we already 3 years later have several dozen, not huge, but several dozen agro-entrepreneurs in the area. Okay? Second example, Bulgaria. We have a plant next to a community where, as the ambassador said earlier, most people have left for the big cities. And the people who remain back there are mostly Roma, so gypsies. And there the huge challenge is that the tradition of that people is that they don't send their children to school. So what happens to society when people don't go to school? And there we've partnered with an American educational foundation, and again the local mayor and the local authorities, and set up schools, and 2 years later we now have 85% enrollment, which is a big step forward. Similarly, in Greece, we have taken several local initiatives, mostly around the area of bringing closer together business and universities, which in this country is a horrible, horrible gap. And that too, in a micro scale, has been successful, where we've encountered a far more difficult time, and I think this comes to some of the issues that were raised earlier in the panel, is when you come to scale up in a bigger scale. And we've been trying to do that. Several people from Maria-Noel, who is here, will talk tomorrow, who works with us, heads the Global Compact in Greece and the Corporate Social Responsibility Network. We also head the Greek Business Council for Sustainable Development. And when you get together with the Federation of Greek Industries and all those big institutions and the government and say, how do we scale this up in a meaningful way? That's when, in our experience, you get lost, because you sort of have still a lot of inability to get things going. So I think the biggest challenge in getting the partnerships going is that scaling up. But I think it's important, in summary, to think of the past, because sustainability is a journey, it's not a destination. And for us, going from reactive to proactive to interactive to partnering and collaborating is an ongoing process.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. And thank you, like previous speakers, like Peggy from Microsoft, like Muhtar from Coca-Cola, for sharing tangible examples that show how private can work with the public. And as you said very correctly, then you have the scaling problem, but this is something we'll come up to, I think, further on. I'd like now to invite Maria-Noel Vaeza, who is the Director of Programs for UN Women.
Thank you.
I hope I pronounced your name right.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to Concordia to invite UN Women and to care about women and women's issues. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk about it. I also am very happy to hear the so successful public-private partnership that we have heard from the mayor of Athens and from the former Obama administration. And of course, for us in the UN, we believe that's the way to go. And I'm very happy to hear how the private sector is embracing the new agenda for the planet. And it's not 3 Ps, I would say it's 4 Ps. It's people, partnership, prosperity, and also how to bring this collaborative partnership together. So we believe very strongly that this is the agenda, and unfortunately we don't have a plan B. So climate change is very, very important, and women has an extremely important role to play. For me, it's very important to say that we believe that the trends that we have right now for gender equality, if they are not disrupted, unfortunately, it's going to be 170 years for women to reach equality. So we don't want that. We only have 13 years. So it is important to disrupt these trends, to introduce technology and to introduce it in a way that reaches to women's empowerment. And it is important also to bring down those structural barriers that still exist for gender equality and women's empowerment. And let me give you one example. When we talk about rural development, 43% of the labor force are women, but they don't have access to land. Some of the countries don't even allow the inheritance of land to women. Some countries, they don't allow women to have financial access. So if you don't have financial access, if you don't have land, and if women don't have access to extensive agricultural, technology, how they can grow? And this is something that the world is losing, because we are doing some experiments, particularly in Rwanda right now, using blockchain technology and making sure that women have access to this kind of innovative work. And we see already, after 6 months, that women are 25% more productive. So if we decide together, private sector, public sector, civil society, to really give the chance to women to have this access, the world would not be stagnant economically. 50% of the population are women. So if we are not given the chance to have this access, we won't be able to progress in general, the government and the private sector and the society as a whole. So structural barriers are critical to be eliminated, and for that we need all together the political will, but also examples, as we heard today, from Coca-Cola and from the different companies that talked before me. There is also a gender gap in political leaderships. Unfortunately, only 22% of the political leaderships in the world are women. We're very far away for a 50-50 planet. And that's why it's so important to take those measures and to disrupt the trends and to make sure that governments and civil society work together to put, for example, some measures. And let's say, as we heard today, the government is the biggest, the budget that the government has is the biggest development policy that we can have in a country. And unfortunately, only 1% of women's-owned companies have access to public procurement. So imagine that we can put some quotas and say, okay, let's push these women's companies to have access to public procurement. Or let's put some provisions in solicitation documents where private companies are pushed to hire more women. So those are the kind of measures that we've been pushing to make sure that women have access to decent work. Right now, we have not only the problem that women don't have access, but also don't forget that women are the center of the family. And they do a lot of what we call unpaid care work. Who is the one who takes care of the children, of the elderly, of the households in general? So it is the woman. So there is a disproportionately burden in the women to deal with what we call unpaid care work. So this is not in an aggregate considered by the monetary policy, because imagine if you consider it in the macro policies, you will see that women contributes a lot to every government and every society. We have three elements that we normally bring to the attention. One is the famous glass ceiling that is so difficult to shatter. It's very, very difficult to reach. But once we reach, we have what we call broken ladders and also sticky floors. Still, women earn 75% only of what a man earns. So we mean that we still have a tax because we're mothers. Because we're mothers, we are going to earn less in the whole career that we are having in a company, for example, or when we look for work. So that's a broken ladder, and that, of course, is not considered when a woman is looking for a job. Also, we have sticky floors, because if you consider what is happening in the corporate world, only 6% of women are CEOs. Why is that? Why is it that women are not capable to be the leaders of a company? So there is a sticky floor. Although we get there, we really don't get there. 6% is nothing if you compare of the importance of the corporate world. Also, women in boards is only 12% in the world. So I'm sorry to bring to you this to your attention, but it is important, like elements like Concordia that are so, bringing together public sector, private sector, can consider gender equality as a basis, as the president of Coca-Cola said, as a basis for economic growth, because women are a power and an engine that can bring this economic growth that we need. Also, speaking about all the things that a woman does, apart from working and being in the house, we are working on a different masculinity. It's okay for a man to look after the baby. It's okay for a man to cook. And that's a different masculinity, because I'm sure that most of you that are here never cooked or never changed a diaper. So why is that? That is only a woman that can do that. So I think that, as my colleague from Microsoft said, why is it that women don't go to STEM? Because they are scared of this technological side, or because the society is not geared towards allowing women to be more proactive in the technical sector. So it is important also to talk about masculinity, to talk about stereotyping women. Well, women cry, women have their period, women have babies, so it's better not to have them in the company. So those are the things that are impeding, those barriers that are impeding to have women in the different parts of the economy. And let me talk a little bit about technology as an accelerator and as a disruptor of this trend that we don't go to wait 170 years for women to have the economic empowerment. We have only 13 years, because the global agenda that the ambassador and everybody approved in the SDGs says that by 2030 we have to have gender equality. So I really underline the use of technology and the use as well of this trustworthy relationship that entities like Concordia are pushing. Of course, the UN is all about that, but we wanted to bring this to the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this useful and powerful delivery of your points. Thank you so much. I have to admit that actually my wife doesn't let me cook. I want to cook, but she will never do. And I have changed diapers in my time. Now, I'd like to invite the last but not least of our lead speakers, who is no other than the former President of the Republic of Latvia, His Excellency Valdis Zatlers. Valdis, please.
I would say it's a nice time to be here in this room, and I have the opportunity to share my views on the partnership and the sustainable development goals. I'll try to be short, and I try to be a little bit optimistic, a little bit pessimistic. The first thing is that we need partnerships. It's absolutely clear, and especially the public and private partnerships. And we have to really understand that they are complementary to each other. And the perception that business is not a solution but a problem should be eliminated immediately. We have to understand why this perception is around here in the air. That's because we have not discussed too often who is doing what and who is investing where. Just to make these two parts, the public support and the private support, really working together for the future and for the achievement of sustainable development goals. But these partnerships are horizontal, vertical, and sometimes very complicated. Because when we look at the European Union's level, there's a program. It's called Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, which includes 79 countries from the partner side and 28 still from the European Union side. It means more than 20 countries try to agree on something. Of course, the European Union has European Development Fund, which is used as best we can use that, but we need partners to share how to use it better. And there's also these economic partnership agreements which are going to be signed will open up a lot of economic opportunities. This is a large scale, but it means that we need the partnership, let's say in a definite country, between the private business and the government of this country. At the same time, we need the partnership between this government of this country and, let's say, in my example, the EU leadership. So to really understand who is doing what, and who is investing where. As we speak about the opportunities and challenges, we all know that these two things approach us hand in hand. When you have an opportunity, you have immediately a challenge. When you have a challenge, you have immediately opportunity. But the key success, how to deal with that, is sharing. And it's not a new principle. It was about 10 years ago, and then people said that it's the only way how to create the global governance. That means sharing the knowledge, sharing the resources, sharing the experience. And especially showing the successful example, business example. And I have the opportunity here to speak about the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, who invested in library network in my country many years ago. And it resulted that the development in IT technologies in my country, we have one of the fastest internets in the globe, despite we are a very small country, and we have created a situation that library has become a social public place of education. And people really like it. They change the mindset of behavior. But if we look at the millennium, not millennium, but sustainable development goals, to my mind, it's very important to see them as a whole. That's very important. But at the same time, we should really put in a sequences of priorities. Because otherwise, if we go all the directions, that we will not succeed as well as we could do if we really see the priorities. And if we talk about responsible consumption and production, it will not come as a priority. It will go when the society is already on a level, when the mindset has changed and they understand that how important it is. Because we are talking about the communities which has less experience that we do have. So, but of course, for the political side, the peace, justice, and strong institutions will be built by the political assistance and political decisions and leadership. And it's very important because it creates the environment for all the others. If we talk about zero hunger and no poverty, okay, zero hunger, I think this is a reality, we can make it immediately. Because we can produce as much food, we can really introduce the technologies for raw materials, bring to the companies who will produce the food where the need is, or the let's say, agricultural technologies bring closer to the place. Like in Italy, they have a 0 kilometer or 1 kilometer principle. They consume everything which is produced in 1 kilometer. So, and this is a lucky community. They are happy about that. If we talk about clean water and affordable energy, they are tools. They're tools. If poverty and hunger is a minimum, they are tools to create, let's say, the mindset and the economic development. But the most important, the basis of the basis, is a quality education. And if we talk about education, everybody of us in this room has a different, let's say, perception. What's a quality education? But when I look at the world's illiteracy rates, I'm talking about the people who are not able to read and write. And maybe they're even not able to sign. They are very high. 10%, 15% is already, a pretty regular phenomena. We have 20%, 40%, 70%. Afghanistan, 70%. And then we understand that all our good efforts and commitments will fail if we don't teach these people. And start with the minimum, start with that. And that's where the companies can do a lot. As I mentioned, my example about just introducing the library network, of course, some other networking, because all these people who are illiterate, they use mobile phones. And that's something very strange, So through the technologies, and the companies can provide these technologies, we can really change the situation with the education in these countries who have high illiterate rates. And of course, if we do that, everything will follow. So again, the politicians must create the legal environment providing fair competition opportunities for the business people in any country. And these partnerships between, let's say, European Union and definite countries may help a lot. They have to also to introduce the good governance practices. And again, not only the politicians can show, they can't show good governance experiences if there are not companies showing on the real examples how they are more successful, they are more profitable, they are more, working for the welfare of the population if they introduce the good governance principles. So I would say again at the end, public and private sectors are complementary. We have to understand that. And the partnerships are sometimes very simple. People to people, company to the politician, company to company. But they are also more complicated, much more complicated. I'm talking not about the UN activities. I'm talking about the European Union and these partnership programs. So why I'm a little bit pessimistic? When we find out about the migration problems, sometimes we think the big data, the statistics, show the trends we all understand on big data. Big data never show the cultural problems, the mindset problems, and emotional problems. And just one example, we have received, I'm finishing, we have received a very small number of refugees, basically from the Greece and Italy. And we were working very carefully to pick up these refugees here in Greece and bring them to Latvia. And what is the end result? After hard work, wasting a lot of resources, from 350 refugees, only one is working in Latvia. All the others are in Germany. And okay, it creates next problem, because they will come back. Germany will send them back to us. And then we need something to create a mechanism how to send them back to the countries. Because one of the reasons is false expectations about the Europe. And therefore, Turkey is much, much more successful in integrating the refugees than Europe. The expectations, especially not on the war refugees, but on the economic refugees, they are absolutely false. And we can't do anything to change it. But altogether we can do that. Because the next problem that will appear in this tasks in the nearest future will be how to relocate these people in the place where they can earn the money, feed their families, and be happy.
Thank you. Thank you, President Zatlers. Now we have concluded the first part, which was the lead speakers. We will open now to questions. First of all, please note that you can send questions also by email, which will be communicated back to us to an email address, which is questions@concordia.net. I suppose it will be posted up there, maybe. So I repeat, questions@concordia.net. Now, before I take your questions, I have already two notes. I would like to invite President Uribe from Colombia, and right after him, I'd like to invite Commissioner Stylianides from the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a great honor to participate in this forum of Concordia. I have a different view on Colombia, my country. For instance, my question is, how can this country achieve sustainable development goals? We have seen the increase in narco-trafficking in the last 4 years. It has passed from 42,000 hectares to 188,000 hectares. Legal miners are fleeing the country. On the other side, illegal mining and narco-trafficking are the only two sectors of the economy that are growing at this moment. I see so many obstacles for the private-public partnership. For instance, Colombia has created a great level of investment confidence, and in the last year, for first time, we saw a decline in gross capital formation. It decreased by 3.6%. And in the first quarter of this year, we have seen the same negative performance in investment confidence. We have dismantled incentives for investment, and at the same time, we drop the legislation to allow the government to sign pacts on stability with the private sector. We have the fourth economy in the world with the highest taxation. At the same time, many areas of the country are under control of terror groups. For instance, last year we saw a growth in extortion by 236%. We had 5,480 cases. We cannot speak on conflict. We cannot speak on post-conflict in a country that has been a rule of law. Colombia is different than other Latin American countries where dictators were confronted by civilians in guns. In Colombia, we have enjoyed the rule of law, and the rule of law has been confronted by narco-terrorist groups. FARC enjoys full impunity, and the country is worse. FARC is the largest cocaine cartel over the world. Therefore, I have many doubts on the possibility for my country on the path it is on at this moment to achieve the sustainable development goals. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I already said, I'd like now to give the floor to Commissioner Stylianides.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank Concordia for this kind invitation. And of course, I'm honored to be here in this as a part of this very distinguished panel discussion. I'm here as European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. And of course, I would like to bring in our discussions the perspective of the European Commission and of course, the European Union as a whole. Thanks, former President of Latvia, for your contribution regarding European ambitions in these SDGs. And now I would like to focus on our priorities for implementing the SDGs and because I'm Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid, especially those related to humanitarian aid. Let me say up front, and I'm very modest, without any exaggeration. If we reach the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, the humanitarian needs will be reduced dramatically. And this is quite important as a figure. 11 targets are clearly linked to this issue, to humanitarian needs, including ending hunger, education, of course, and climate change. So, as European Union, our major goal is leaving no one behind. I would like to describe very briefly our priorities as headlines. Firstly, resilience. Secondly, humanitarian and development nexus. Thirdly, partnership, in particular with private sector. I'm coming from the private sector. I'm not bureaucratic. And I'm here to show that there is possibility to see effective combination in our practice in real terms. In particular, when we use the so-called PPP, private-public partnership. This is quite important, in particular in Africa. And I would like to focus a little bit on education and, of course, on demographic explosion, in particular in Africa. So, resilience definitely is a central element of our approach to reduce vulnerability. And our aim is to help societies and governments to invest in risk management and to build capacities for preemptive and early action. Prevention is better than cure, definitely. To this end, we are promoting bringing together the Sustainable Development Goals with the so-called Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. I was in Cancun 2 weeks ago when we had this global platform, and I demonstrated the Commission's ambitious action plan on the Sendai implementation. And I had a lot of meetings with the private sector, and I saw that, in particular, the Sendai implementation is the definition of the win-win situation between private sector and public sector. And this is quite important to realize and to find the ways in order to find implementing partners in all angles, in all aspects, from the local level until the most high-level governmental level. So now, regarding Sendai framework, it's time of all actors involved to put words into action. Second point, humanitarian and development nexus. There is no doubt to meet the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals and to address protracted crisis and vulnerability, humanitarian and development actors must work together. We have to cooperate on the ground, not in theory. And there is no doubt at the same time that it's quite important, in particular in conflict areas, to find the best ways to increase the collaboration between humanitarian workers and development workers. And for me, personally, the best example of this nexus, of this link, is the education, and in particular for me as humanitarian commissioner, the education in emergencies. as my dear colleague and my dear friend Stavros Lambrinidis knows well, that in our European institutions, Stylianides has the nickname, they accuse me, I have an obsession about education. And I realize here that many of you, they have the same obsession. And thank you for this. And as he said, why not? Because it is a positive obsession. And tomorrow I'm going to Turkey to launch, for me, one of the best projects funded by the European Union focused on education in emergencies. And this is a part of the so-called ESSN project, Emergency Social Safety Net, which is the ever largest funded European project in Turkey, and this is quite important, and for us as European citizens, the Turkish citizens, but also the refugees who live now in Turkey. So,
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I also have the
okay.
Thing with time, so please, if you'd like to.
I would like to conclude this first intervention to focus on Africa. And I would like to give you some figures, and in particular on demographic explosion. My dear colleague here knows well that UN projects that by 2050, the population of Africa will be 2.4 billion. Predominantly young people, and in concrete terms, this means 3.5 million more people per month, or 80 more people per minute. It is a demographic explosion. And this demographic explosion will create one of the most significant structural changes in African continent. This is why I focus on this, because I strongly believe that regarding sustainable goals, we have to deal with this issue in Africa, because the migration flows, the migration influxes definitely will increase in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Now, I have a number of speakers who have asked for the floor. I have to note that we have around 15 minutes ahead of us, so I'll try to push it to be quick. I will start by the civil society, which I think needs to be heard. I have two representatives. One is Ms. Caroline Miles and then Nikos Charalambides. Caroline Miles from Save the Children, and then Nikos Charalambides from Greenpeace, and then we go on with other speakers.
Thank you, and thank you very much to the panel. And you'll be glad to know, Maria, that my husband's really good at diaper changing. It's very important. I'd like to just offer to the panel and actually to the forum that one of the key ways I think we can drive these partnerships, and I would actually maybe go to the next step of calling them coalitions, not just partnerships, but coalitions, is to start with very concrete goals. So to start with, what is it that we're trying to get to? And I'll give you a good example. Within SDG number 3, which is all about health, there's a child survival goal. You might not be surprised. I'm going to talk about that. There are 1 million kids that die, almost 1 million kids that die every single year of pneumonia. This is one good example where we can bring together lots of different people. No child needs to die of pneumonia. So a coalition that involves people like GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer, who make a pneumonia vaccine, Philips, who's making a new technology to actually diagnose a lung ultrasound, to diagnose pneumonia that plugs into your cell phone so the health worker in a low resource setting can get the diagnosis. People like J&J, whose business is about community, is about health workers, helping drive community health worker training. So that private piece is really important and very tangible when you're thinking about things like solving pneumonia and ending the deaths of 1 million kids every single year. But it's not enough. You also need NGOs on the ground like Save the Children, like CARE, like World Vision, working with governments like Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh. Those are the places where these kids die. And we need to drive that policy change and drive those changes in those countries. You need what I would call donors with stamina, which is people who are going to stay in this for the long term, people like the Gates Foundation. It used to be people like our government in the United States. I hope it still will be. The governments of the UK, Norway, etc. And you need parents on the ground to say that my kids are not going to die of something like pneumonia, which is so easily treatable that no child has to die of those things. And I think if we start with a big, inspiring goal, like saving 1 million lives of children every single year over the next 13 years, we could get there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Charalambides, Greenpeace.
Thank you, Spyros. Let me congratulate Concordia and thank everyone for the contribution. It's a very rich discussion. I'm speechless. Let me also throw a few ideas on the table. I hope you find them useful. First of all, I find the whole concept of the SDGs very cunning. There's something cunning behind because they're interrelated. We can pick and choose 2 or 3 of them, and then we soon find out that it's not working properly. You need to work with the others too, or if you cannot work with the others, you need to work with others that are with other SDGs. So it pushes you towards more participatory approach, working with others. And a few words and a few notes. Relevance. A KPI that we could use is next time we meet, next time somebody is having such a discussion, is we check how this is becoming more relevant to what's happening outside. We need to check how these discussions are relevant to everybody's everyday's life of people, not just to us. And we need to check how this is measured. We do have some ideas that we do in our area, but it's not to be shared now, here and now. But the second is how we are more consistent. So how the SDGs are not just part of our business, but it's the core of our business. It's not a side effect of our business. And we could see, for instance, big players that play a key role, like the European Union. And this is not just the Commission. The European Union is also the government, is also the Parliament. They're not just adopting the SDGs, but all the things they do are aligned with that. So to that extent, I suggest something that is a little awkward. Instead of saying how many good things we'll be doing in this direction, let's start first by checking which are the things that we already do that are moving us to the opposite direction. There are things that all of us are doing, the European Commission, the corporate world, the civil society, that are heading us, that are leading us to a direction that is opposite to some of the SDGs. Let's start by stopping that before adding more complexity and more confusion. The more complex thing is that moving towards the SDGs, it also challenges the business as usual scenario. Not necessarily all of us, but most of us need also to see not just how we can slightly improve the way we'll be doing to be relevant, but maybe we need to change and challenge our whole business model. It's all about decentralization, it's all about empowering, it's all about more participatory. So many things, talking about the energy sector, for instance, is a very clear example. Or talking about consumption, we need to change consumption patterns. And talking about education, we're educating thousands of young people to go out and be new marketeers. What are they going to be training people to do? They're going to be asking people to consume more, or consume more wisely, or try to introduce new values. We're not there. So there needs to be consistency in all the different levels and layers. Last but not least, our deeds need to convey more messages of solidarity and not polarization. And that's the other cunning thing of the SDGs. We need to be more together with all of our differences. That's a richness. And we need to find ways to move forward with them. I cannot stop without referring to climate change. We've been talking about refugees in several occasions. We've been dealing with refugees in several occasions. Think of the fact that there are countries, I'm not referring to Tuvalu or to small island countries. I'm referring to countries like Bangladesh, where the average height of the country is less than a meter. Think that in a few years we're going to be talking about hundreds of millions of people moving there, being displaced there for reasons that they're not up to them. And this is something we need to be prepared of. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. I think that everybody seconds your thoughts about the need to take climate change very, very, very seriously. And I'd like to try to give the rest of the time to as many speakers as possible, although I have a list that is bigger than what I can fit in the time that we have. So I would like to invite immediately President Jorge Quiroga of Bolivia, who has asked for the floor, and then try to see if we can get one more.
Well, thank you. Just quick observation and a suggestion. The observation about SDGs is black swans. Black swans are these unforeseen events that nobody had forecast or foreseen that wind up changing everything. International agreements have black swans. I think I come from a country that has achieved all the MDGs. I would love to tell you it's because of the great policies we put in place. Partially, yes. But if you look at developing countries, the ones that made the MDGs, it's probably because they sold commodities to China that kept buying them at ever-increasing prices, at ever higher volumes, and more money flowed into those countries. So that's the black swan that allowed many of us to make the MDGs. Same thing you can say for Kyoto. What countries reduced emissions? Countries like the US. Government? No. Fracking and switching from coal to gas. I would suggest on SDGs, the most predictable black swan is technology. And technology is, we always say that this generation lives different than ours. I try to tell my daughters, they don't believe me. When I went to college, I had a physical P.O. box. Your girlfriends would dump you with a letter with stamps, not on Facebook. I tell my daughters when I was in college, Google was a radio soccer announcer. Amazon was a river in Brazil. YouTube was the London Underground. Apple was a record label for the Beatles. So it's a totally different world. So the black swan for the SDGs is technology. And if we're able to incorporate technology into development in ways that we do not yet see, if we could get WhatsApp to be like WeChat for remittances from Latin Americans in the US or Spain to send it like money, and then I can take it to a microcredit institution and make it loans and capital, it would change the whole concept of development. My phone is already, like most of yours, biometric. All our IDs are biometric. How do we incorporate that technology into everyday government functions? Many times you fly from La Paz all the way to Athens and you hear one thing that makes the whole trip worth it, what Mr. Kent just mentioned. If we get 4G, 5G access in every rural community in the developing world, that's the game changer. Then you can achieve the SDGs. The cleavage right now is not between Montevideo, La Paz, Bogota, or Switzerland. It's between rural and urban areas. I can do everything in La Paz that you can do here. So an example like that, if I can get 5G access to every kid in every rural area in Africa and Latin America, then I can achieve the SDGs. So my challenge would be to Concordia, Matthew, perhaps, to look at the SDGs and figure out which ways can I integrate technology to help me achieve it. I can give you all kinds of public policies, bilingual education, 200 days of schooling, rural education, but I guarantee you, if you give me 5G access in rural areas, that'll replace everything else. And if that works, I'll sit in Tinquipaya, Potosí, with a Coke can in my hand and say cheers to you for having achieved that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like now to give the floor to Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, who is the EU Special Representative for Human Rights. Before I do so, though, I'd like also to make, from my side, an announcement that because there's many black swans that are very, very difficult to catch, actually, we have now established a collaboration between the European Public Law Organization, which is mostly a public institution, and the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership to try to bring together those two sides, of which I'll be telling you more because we don't have the time now, but you will all be invited to be part of. Stavros Lambrinidis.
Thank you, Spyros. The very quick first point. I think that the big revolution at the UN context was changing that world from millennium to sustainable. It changed the entire discussion, the way that we're looking at things. And it was fundamental that the United Nations declared that sustainable means that all human rights have to be applied as we are developing. It became very clear after a while that you could develop by polluting a river because that would make cheaper products, or you could develop by employing child labor or slave labor because that would also be cheaper. But the world community said that's not good enough. That's not the millennium we want. We want sustainability. Now, in a sense, and that's my first point, we need a race to the top, a development based on quality, not on inequality. Quality of education for women and children, quality of the environment, quality of governance. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 16 focuses for the first time on the importance of good governance, non-corruption, getting civil society involved, etc. Okay. Second point, businesses can make a huge difference in promoting and protecting human rights around the world, a positive one or potentially a negative one. And my hope is, and this hope is in fact multiplied by so many things said in this room today, but by all these leaders of industry, that it will become a race to the top for industry itself to compete on who is actually better at taking into account those human rights elements. Now, I remember, see, Google and Microsoft a few years back, I used to be in a very early life at the European Parliament. We were fighting with you companies, some of us who are privacy motivated because it was just too much. At the time that all the data was being collected, there was almost no consideration among companies of how it is that precisely you have to ensure that privacy works. And eventually there was a tipping point around 2009, I think, 2010 maybe, where suddenly companies started competing about who will protect your data better, who will actually keep it for a smaller period of time, etc. Dimitri mentioned about how at some point in the 2000s, cement companies decided it's in your own interest to get together and avoid the negative consequences of not doing something. So it is indeed shareholder self-interest, as you said, that if intelligently explained, can make a huge difference. Now, the final, so in a sense, let me just say, on the business thing, look, corporate social responsibility is one thing, but that's also how businesses spend their money. Another question is, how do businesses make their money? And that is really what business and human rights is all about. If you like, it's both. A business educating kids is huge. That's more corporate social responsibility for me. IKEA ensuring that suppliers in Pakistan pay their workers is business human rights. Closing. The European Union just issued, and Christos, of course, touched on this, the European Consensus on Development. This is the policy plan that we will apply to have the SDGs in place by 2030 around the world. If you look into it, you will see a number of explicit provisions on public-private partnerships. The EU commits to fund and to work with private organizations and fundamentally civil society in order to ensure sustainable sourcing of materials and use, good governance, human rights, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. And at this point, I'm afraid I will have to call this session to a close. I'd like to thank you all for my behalf and apologize to the other speakers that we didn't have the time to accommodate this, but the organizers are asking me to close the session. I want to thank you all for your participation, for your very informed and very passionate participation. And I hope that we will be able to discuss more about those issues over the next day as well in the lobby or elsewhere. Now I would like to invite Matthew Swift for his closing remarks of the day. And Matthew is?
It's an honor to be Matthew Swift's proxy. My name's Hannah Dalman. I'm Director of Social Impact here at Concordia, and it's been a real pleasure to sit in this session and to observe the conversation that has happened today here in this room, out in the hallway, and in the lead-up. We've really been grateful to work with everyone around the table and the room, and are just very pleased to be here in Athens for this important conversation. I'd like to say a special thank you also for our fantastic speakers, from Muhtar Kent, from Jose Manuel Barroso, everybody here and who's been on the stage. We've really learned a lot and are grateful for the insight you've shared with us on these key important issues. I'd also like to thank President Quiroga for the challenge on what Concordia can do to bring technology into our solutions, and it's well noted, and we'll take it forward. Concordia is focused on the role of partnerships in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, to no surprise here, Goal 17 on partnerships. This framework, constructed by the UN, is a core theme and driving force behind Concordia's programming, and we've carried this arc through our 2016 Concordia Annual Summit and various programmings throughout 2017 and into this fall's Annual Summit. Through our efforts, we aim to measure progress in the private sector's role and partnerships' ability to scale impact when working towards achieving these global goals. Goal 17 is the embodiment of Concordia's beliefs, and our conversations today are progress towards achieving this, and all the SDGs. And we try to galvanize support for lasting peace and growing prosperity across Europe and globally. We appreciate your support. We hope to continue these conversations into tomorrow and beyond as steps towards collaboration across sectors for European economic development, security, and stability. Tomorrow, we'll look forward to starting the day with an address from former US Vice President Joe Biden. The program will then cover the most pressing concerns of the EU, as well as the fundamental recalibration needed to shift away from short-term approaches to holistic strategies to address the refugee crisis. I'd like to close with a housekeeping reminder and a challenge. First, please keep these badges. You will need them to enter in tomorrow. If you've misplaced yours, please let us know. And secondly, as a challenge, what does the public sector need to do to get us to this point? We've heard a lot today about what the private sector can do, but I'd like to challenge, especially our private sector representative friends here today, to continue this and think about what the public sector can be doing, especially from the lens of partnerships. Think about this around the stage, or around the table, on the stage, and in your networking conversations in and around. The intent of Concordia is to leverage everybody in a room to build a collaborative solution. And so it's not just for people at the table, but it's for everybody to be thinking and to feel empowered to be part of the solution. So thank you. We really look forward to everybody's comments tomorrow, and just, again, enjoy the rest of the day.